Foster Brooks stumbled onto the Tonight Show stage, his tuxedo slightly askew, bow tie crooked, holding what appeared to be a cocktail glass. He took a sip, swayed slightly, and when Johnny Carson asked him how he was doing, Foster squinted at him with unfocused eyes and said, "Johnny, I'm fine. Never been better." Absolutely. What was the question? The audience roared with laughter. Johnny grinned, but for just a second, you could see him wondering, is this guy really drunk? Then Foster winked so subtle that half the audience missed it, and Johnny understood. This wasn't a drunk comedian. This was a stone-cold, sober comedian doing the single most convincing drunk impression in the history of American television. Foster Brooks was not drunk. He had never been drunk on The Tonight Show. He had never been drunk on The Dean Martin Show, where he became a household name. He had never been drunk during his Emmy-nominated performances that made him one of the most sought-after comedic acts of the 1970s. Foster Brooks didn't drink at all. He was a teetotaler who'd built an entire career playing a lovable drunk so convincingly that people genuinely couldn't tell it was an act. Even after they were told it was an act, they still weren't entirely sure. The story of how Foster Brooks became the lovable lush is one of the strangest success stories in show business. Because Foster didn't set out to play a drunk, he didn't even want to be a comedian. For most of his life, Foster Brooks was a radio announcer, a serious professional with a deep baritone voice that was perfect for broadcasting. He worked at WH in Louisville, Kentucky, reporting floods and reading news. He was good at it, respected, completely anonymous outside of Kentucky. Then in 1969, when Foster was already 57 years old, an age when most people are thinking about retirement, not career changes, everything changed because of a traffic jam. Foster was in Los Angeles for a radio convention. He'd been invited to perform at a small industry event, doing some light comedy material he'd been tinkering with. Nothing serious, just radio people, entertaining other radio people. But on the way to the event, Foster got stuck in traffic. Sitting in his car, bored, frustrated, he started playing around with voices. He'd always been good at impressions. It was part of what made him a good radio personality. And for some reason, stuck in that traffic jam, Foster started doing a drunk voice, slurring his words, mixing up syllables, making his sentences loop back on themselves in that confused way drunk people talk. When he finally arrived at the event 45 minutes late, Foster was flustered. He hadn't prepared. He didn't have his material ready. So he walked on stage and on pure impulse stayed in the drunk character he'd been practicing in the car. He pretended to be a drunk conventioneer who'd had a few too many at the hotel bar. He slurred through his introduction, forgot people's names, went on tangents that made no sense. The audience, all radio professionals who'd seen everything, absolutely lost it. They'd never seen anything like it. Foster had accidentally created a character. After the show, a man approached Foster. His name was Perry Como. Yes, that Perry Como, one of the biggest stars in entertainment. Cole had been in the audience by chance and had been so impressed that he wanted to hire Foster to open for him in Las Vegas. Foster thought Cole was joking. He was a 57-year-old radio announcer from Kentucky. He wasn't a Vegas performer. But Cole was serious. He saw something special in Foster's drunk character. Something no one else was doing quite that way. The hotel owners in Vegas balked at KO's choice. Foster Brooks was too old, too unknown, too risky. But Ko insisted, this guy is special. Trust me. And Perry Ko didn't insist on things unless he was absolutely certain. The hotel owners acquiesced. Foster Brooks, with his drunk character that he'd invented 45 minutes late to a radio convention, was about to open for Perry Ko in Las Vegas. Foster was terrified. He'd never performed comedy professionally. He'd never been on a stage like this. He was 57 years old, starting a completely new career doing a character he'd created by accident. What if it didn't work outside that one radio convention? What if Vegas audiences didn't get it? What if this was the biggest mistake of his life? He walked on stage at the Las Vegas Hotel in 1969, pretending to be drunk, and the audience went absolutely insane. The laughter was immediate, sustained, genuine. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. It looked real. It sounded real. The way Foster would pause, search for a word, find a wrong word, then correct himself with an even wronger word. It was exactly how drunk people talked. The physicality was perfect, too. The slight sway. The overcorrection when he thought he was leaning too far. The exaggerated precision when he tried to appear sober. Within weeks of that Vegas debut, Foster Brooks was getting calls from television producers. Everyone wanted the drunk guy. The lovable, harmless, funny, drunk guy who made drinking look endearing instead of pathetic. The timing couldn't have been better. America, in the early 1970s, was ready for Foster Brooks. Dean Martin had made drinking look cool. Foster made it look adorable. His first appearance on The Tonight Show came soon after the Vegas debut. Johnny Carson had heard about this new comic, who did a drunk act that was supposedly amazing. Johnny was skeptical. He'd seen plenty of drunk acts. They were usually on one-note jokes that got old fast, but Fred DeCordova, Johnny's producer, insisted Foster was different. So Johnny agreed to have him on. Foster walked out onto the Tonight Show stage the first time, and from the moment he appeared, the audience was already laughing. Just his entrance, the slight stumble, the overcorrected posture, the careful way he navigated the couch was comedy gold. He sat down, arranged himself with exaggerated care, and when Johnny asked him a simple question, Foster launched into an answer that started in one place, veered into 3 different tangents, forgot the original question, and somehow ended up being hilarious without ever making complete sense. Johnny was immediately impressed. This wasn't just a drunk impression. This was a fully realized character with consistent logic, perfect timing, and details so specific they had to have come from careful observation. The way Foster would overcorrect his pronunciation, saying a word too carefully after slurring it. The way he'd lose his train of thought mid-sentence and have to loop back. The way he'd make a joke, then laugh at his own joke too hard, then forget he was supposed to be telling another joke. After that first appearance, Johnny invited Foster back and back and back. Foster Brooks became one of the Tonight Show's most frequent guests throughout the 1970s. Every appearance was essentially the same character: the drunk conventioneer, the drunk wedding guest, the drunk awards presenter. But Foster found infinite variations within that framework. Each time the audience would wonder, is he really drunk? Could someone fake it this well? The answer was always no. He wasn't drunk. But Foster understood something crucial. The more convincingly he played drunk, the less he could break character. Ever. If people saw Foster Brooks sober, even for a second, the magic would break. So Foster stayed in character from the moment he appeared on stage until the moment he walked off. No breaks, no winks at the camera, except that one subtle one Johnny saw in their first meeting. Just sustained, flawless, drunk acting. His big break came when Dean Martin hired him for the Dean Martin Show. This was perfect synergy. Dean, who played drunk but claimed it was apple juice, and Foster, who played drunk and everyone knew it was acting but couldn't quite believe it. The two of them together created comedy magic. Dean would play the cool drunk. Foster would play the messy drunk, and audiences ate it up. Foster's signature routine became the roast. He'd appear at celebrity roasts, formal events where comedians would gently mock famous people. And Foster would show up as the drunk guy who couldn't remember who he was supposed to be roasting. He'd call Don Rickles Don Pickles. He'd forget Muhammad Ali's name and call him that boxing fellow. He'd start a joke, forget the punchline, apologize, then accidentally tell a completely different joke that was somehow funnier. In 1974, Foster was nominated for an Emmy Award for his work on The Dean Martin Show, an Emmy for playing drunk. It was both hilarious and weirdly appropriate. Foster didn't win. He lost to someone whose name nobody remembers now, but the nomination itself proved that what Foster was doing was legitimate acting, not just comedy. The question everyone asked Foster constantly was, how do you do it so well? And Foster's answer was always simple. I watch. I pay attention. Foster had spent decades as a radio announcer, which meant he'd been to hundreds of conventions, parties, events where people were drinking. He'd observed drunk people for years. He knew how they talked, moved, thought. He knew the specific ways drunk logic worked. How a drunk person would over-explain something simple, then gloss over something complicated. How they'd be overly formal to prove they weren't drunk, which only proved they were drunk. Foster also understood the key to making drunk comedy work. The character had to be harmless, lovable. If Foster played a mean drunk or a sad drunk or a dangerous drunk, it wouldn't be funny. It would be uncomfortable. So Foster created the lovable Lush, a guy who'd had too much to drink at a wedding or a convention, who was going to embarrass himself a little but not hurt anyone, who'd wake up the next morning mortified but ultimately fine. That's why audiences could laugh without guilt. But here's what made Foster Brooks truly special. He knew when to break. In interviews out of character, Foster was articulate, intelligent, completely sober. He'd talk about his career, his character, his technique. He'd do it in that beautiful baritone voice that made him a successful radio announcer. And people who met Foster out of character were always shocked. Wait, that's the drunk guy? He's so normal. That contrast made the character work even better. When people knew Foster Brooks, the person was sober and professional. It made Foster Brooks, the character, seem like even better acting. It added a layer of appreciation to performance. You weren't laughing at a drunk. You were laughing at an actor so skilled he could become a drunk. Foster continued performing through the 1970s and into the 1980s. He appeared on every major variety show, every roast, every comedy special. He became so associated with the drunk character that it was impossible to imagine Foster Brooks doing anything else, which was fine with Foster. He'd stumbled literally into a career at age 57. He wasn't going to complain that it had pigeonholed him. He'd had a good run. The lovable Lush character started to fade in the 1980s as television moved away from variety shows and toward sitcoms. There wasn't much room for Foster's character in the new TV landscape. He still got work, still did appearances, but the golden age of Foster Brooks was the 1970s. That decade belonged to him. Foster Brooks died in 2001 at age 89. His obituaries all led with the same information. Foster Brooks, comedian known for playing the lovable Lush, dead at 89. They mentioned his Emmy nomination, his appearances on the Dean Martin Show, his frequent Tonight Show visits. But what they couldn't quite capture in words was how convincing Foster had been. How people who knew it was an act still wondered if maybe, just maybe, he'd had a few drinks before going on stage. Johnny Carson spoke about Foster after his death. Johnny said, "Foster Brooks was one of the most dedicated performers I ever worked with. He created a character, and he committed to it completely. No half measures, no breaking, just pure sustained performance. And he made it look effortless, which is the hardest thing to do in comedy. The character Foster created, the lovable Lush, was so specific, so perfect that nobody else could do it. Plenty of comedians have tried drunk impressions since Foster. None of them come close. Because Foster understood something they don't. It's not about stumbling around and slurring words. It's about the precise way drunk people try not to seem drunk. The overcorrection, the false confidence, the logic that makes sense to them but to nobody else. In a weird way, Foster Brooks was the anti-Dean Martin. Dean's drunk persona left everyone wondering if it was real. Foster's drunk persona was obviously acting, but it was so good that people still wondered. Two different approaches to the same character. Both brilliant in their own way. There's a great story that sums up Foster Brooks perfectly. After one of his Tonight Show appearances in the mid-1970s, a viewer wrote to NBC complaining that Johnny had allowed a drunk man on television. This person was genuinely concerned for Foster's well-being, insisting that Johnny should have stopped the segment, that it was irresponsible to let someone that intoxicated embarrass himself on national television. The letter was sincere, worried, completely missing that it was a performance. When Foster heard about the letter, he loved it. That was the ultimate compliment. He convinced someone so completely that they couldn't see the acting. That was the goal. That was the art. Foster Brooks, a teetotaler who'd never been drunk in his life, had created a drunk character so believable that people thought he needed an intervention. Foster Brooks walked onto the Tonight Show stage dozens of times between 1969 and the early 1990s. Every time he stumbled, slurred, mixed up his words, and made audiences laugh until they cried. And every single time, the moment he walked behind that curtain, Foster Brooks straightened up, spoke clearly, and went home sober. The lovable Lush was a character. Foster Brooks was an actor. And the fact that so few people could tell the difference is a testament to just how good Foster really was. If this story of the comedian who fooled everyone, the teetotaler who played drunk better than actual drunks, and the 57-year-old radio announcer who accidentally became a comedy legend, entertained you, subscribe and share with someone who appreciates perfect character acting. Have you ever been so convinced by a performance you forgot it was acting? Share your story in the comments and hit that notification bell for more stories about the performers who made deception an art form